Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to On the Record, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Shore in association with Rope-A-Dope. Bear with me one second. I'm your host, Louis Marks, here at the Rope-A-Dope Room in Philadelphia. And I'm just testing very quickly as we are quarantined here with no technical support. And I think everything looks good. So if you're new to this program, what happens is Dekel Bor has lined up an amazing cast of producers and engineers to discuss the business, to discuss their motivation and technique, and it's quite a lineup. And today we have the great pleasure of welcoming musician and producer Michael Beinhorn, a co-founder of the musical collective Material. Michael also co-produced Herbie Hancock's Future Shock, sharing the writing on the legendary Grammy-winning track Rockit. And if that's not a piece of history, I don't know what is. He went on to work with countless legends from Marilyn Manson to Soundgarden, winning Producer of the Year for his work on Hole's Celebrity Skin. In recent years, Michael's been active in supporting musicians, mentoring fellow artists and producers. He's the author of Unlocking Creativity, in which he addresses the issue of maintaining creative ethics and focusing on the recording process, among others. Dekel Bor is joining us from Berlin. He's performed with jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and many more. They say you can judge someone on the company they keep, and let me tell you, Dekel Bor keeps good company, as this series will show you. His recent release, Let Love Rule, was out this year on Rope-A-Dope and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com, as well as other streaming services. So, without further ado, as they say, I'd like to welcome Mr. Dekel Bor to the room. Dekel, how are you?
Louis, I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Excited to be doing this. Just to get everyone on the same page. Now that this is out and we're completely excited and the response has been more than amazing. It's time for the next album. And I think this is something that a lot of musicians hit. What am I doing next? How am I doing this? I'm going to go about this the old jazz way, which is reaching out to your mentors, reaching out to the elders of the tribe, the masters, and get their input. So today, I don't even know where to begin. But Michael Beinhorn is really a legend. There's just too many albums that you love that has his sound on it, his imprint on it. There's just way too many number one hits. But when I put all the statistics aside, Michael has done something that very few artists do, which is to leave an imprint, a cultural imprint on society on more than a couple of generations. So before I get to all the specific questions, Michael, how are you? How are you guys doing?
Es ist gut, Peter. Wie geht es Ihnen?
It's good to be seeing you. Have you guys been? Are you guys well? Are you guys safe? It's been a rough year.
Thanks, man. It's, in some respects, yeah. In other respects, it's kind of business as usual, I think. But thanks for asking. I appreciate it. I hope you're doing the same.
So yeah, we're very lucky and fortunate to be healthy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it boils down to.
Yes.
So now that we had a chunk of time on our hands, 3 or so albums that inspired you in these past few months.
In the past few months?
Yeah, that you've been listening to that that you find inspiring for you.
I can't give you. There's no way I can give you 3. It's just not. It's not possible. I mean, no, seriously, come on. It's
choose a number. Choose a
What's
number.
That?
Choose your number.
I don't know, dozens, hundreds, maybe. I mean, I just last night I was driving someplace and haven't listened to any John Coltrane records for a long time. And I started listening to Giant Steps, and I was like, I actually noticed that someone on social media had posted something about Coltrane, going I don't know what people think of, seeing this guy, but I find his records after those Standards records he did and the work he did with Miles Davis to be unlistenable. To this record, and I'm like, look, I'm not a technical musician by any stretch, but there's just something really intense about it. There's a real urgency to it, and it really speaks of the times, and it just kind of taps you right in. And I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. You know, it's great. You know, like it's been a wonderful time because like I've been able to like get back to music from a completely different perspective. You know, so like I've been listening to lots of music while I'm working. You know, alongside of it. It's kind of like,
of course.
you know, I can't. There's no thing. I can't do it.
Actually, the truth is that Coltrane is a huge thing for me. Like I almost did, instead of Let Light Rule, I almost did a Coltrane album with Billy Hart. We were like this close,
Oh wow.
and I didn't feel completely ready for it. But I was mentored by his bass player, Reggie Workman. I played in his band.
Yeah.
I got to play with Elvin Jones, and it's really like a thread throughout my life is music. And I think Giant Steps is a very specific album because for it's a time capsule in which he kept throwing out ideas after ideas after ideas. It's really unbelievable the wealth of that he had within him. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really
At the
is. And you
same
can hear
time,
him.
it's the same guy, same year that will play a super sweet solo, like a ballad like solo on Kind of Blue,
Yeah.
and and your heart is on the floor.
He was amazing. I mean, he was just extending the vocabulary of his instrument, of that style of music, and it just really pushed everything along so well. Like, it just kicked me in the butt. You know, I'm taking this long drive to pick my daughter up last night, and I'm just listening to this, going, oh my God, I can't believe it's been so long since I've listened to this record too, and it's so
Totally.
amazing.
How are you listening? When you listen mostly, how do you listen to? Like, which format? Are you like an audiophile, only specific this or only specific that, or?
Well, you know, there's kind of like there's several options. One of which is being at home, and if I'm at home, I have a choice between vinyl and a really kind of a high end like playback system, which I have to add a streamer onto it because I'm using my computer as kind of like the source, but I'm going through an external DAC and an upsampler and really nice headphones for everything. But if I'm in a car, you know, you sort of take what you take what you can get. You know, but
Well said. Well
yeah,
said.
but I mean, I honestly, I'm getting back into vinyl again because there's just something about it that digital can't get.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. You know, there's just a certain depth to it, and even though digital is much faster, you know, and I guess you can kind of hear that, and the transients are speedier. There's something about a good analog recording that's got more punch. It's got more like density to it, and you can really make out the difference in tonal quality between the instruments. You know, it glues together better, but there's at the same time there's more separation. It's really wonderful.
I've been discovering vinyl big time for the past few years, and when you speak about punch, the things that kind of blow me away the most are some of the mono recordings of a specific album. You get like a mono pressing, and it kind of seems to kind of like jump out of your speakers in like the most incredible way.
Yeah, totally.
I'm really always trying to upgrade the system a little bit like this, a little bit over there. It's like it's a never-ending rabbit hole, which is also like a studio.
Yeah.
So before we get into studio things, how did you get into music? Like, what was the moment for you?
Well, there's several moments really. You know, all of which is when I was much younger. My mom was an opera singer and a pianist, and she'd play a lot of classical music, a lot of chamber music, and I would, you know, I'd sit there and I'd just sort of like absorb it. Then I'd listen to her records and my dad's records, and it was all, you know, it was all music, you know, from the Baroque period on through to, you know, to the end of the Romantic and into the Impressionist period, you know, and I loved all of it. And then they started
Same
bringing
story
Beatles,
for me.
right?
Exactly. My dad is a classical percussionist for the Israel Philharmonic. So
wow,
I
okay.
grew up into that vocabulary. Same story.
Yeah. It's amazing. But then I remember seeing movies, like war movies and stuff like that, where they had like these things blowing up, and there was something about it that was so exciting. Something in my brain made this connection between sonics and music, And then when I was like 7 or 8, my grandparents had a copy of Switched on Bach by Walter, now Wendy Carlos. And that was, I think that those elements kind of like, they meshed, they came
Wow.
together, and they completely informed me for the rest of my life. I mean, listening to Beatles records, kind of getting, even as a child, not understanding what was going on, not understanding anything about the recording studio milieu, or what's done in a studio, how you're actually moving things around, manipulating sounds to get them to fit together and to occupy space in a certain way. I kind of came to these conclusions, very young, without actually even knowing what it was I was concluding. So everything it all fell into place perfectly as I got older.
And you started playing instruments. You went straight into the sound world.
I started playing synthesizer. I'm not, and I would never consider myself, a fast keyboard player. I mean, I can work my way around a keyboard, but I never tried to be very good. It was the interest in sounds. It was the interest in textural, in using the instrument as a textural element. And I got heavily into synthesizer programming.
So in your eyes, what's the role of a producer? What does that mean to you?
It means, well, it means many things. I feel a producer has to wear a great many hats. And one of the most, I think one of the arching aspects of a music producer is to be present on a recording and to be able to kind of fill in all the empty spaces, to kind of facilitate and potentiate the recording and what it can be, to have then to have a vision about what this can turn into, not just being the guy who is essentially taking and faithfully replicating what's there in front of him. It's like, what can this turn into? What can this become? Taking into account all the elements, taking into account all the individual components, as well as the unity of the whole, which is kind of systems thinking. How do we get how are all these elements kind of functioning as one, individually and collectively, and how can we bring it to its fullest potential, and what does that look like, and from there, what does it sound like?
And what happens? And you go through your vision with the artist or with the band, and you ask for their vision, and like, what's the ratio between your vision and what something could be, maybe with an artist that is not as mature in their vision, or versus a group that has a very strong vision, but they want someone to be like a documentarist, which
This
is
is
like
a this is a really mutable kind of situation. It's constantly in a state of flux. And to me, like, I have to be in a very kind of sensitized condition, a state where I'm kind of aware of what's going on and being sensitive to what's happening in the work environment from moment to moment. So a lot of it is understanding where the artist is at, understanding how far I can go with them in terms of imprinting my idea of what a recording is, and when that could potentially start interfering with what their idea is, where these perceptions are able to intersect easily, where they might have a little bit of tension, where they're not going to intersect at all, which honestly almost never happens, because ultimately I find that even if I'm coming at it from a completely different perspective than the artist, somehow everything just winds up joining really nicely. Even if there's tension around the project itself, ultimately everyone respects what it's starting to turn into, because there's a certain point on a recording, especially one that's going to turn into something really amazing, where the project takes itself over.
I'm going to stop
what I'm
you right
talking
there.
about, right?
Is there a tipping point for you when you start thinking, this is going somewhere? I mean, is it like a moment for you?
There are moments I become aware that the project isn't in my hands anymore, and all I am is basically kind of like a funnel. I'm a vessel And any ideas that I have really aren't mine. Like they come from someplace else entirely. And I'm not really, I, I mean, I can certainly say down the road, yeah, that was my idea, but I know deep down in my heart that it, you know, that this stuff comes from the ether. It's just kind of like, you know, came to, okay, that, there you go.
So this
You
is
know,
in the middle. This is for you in the middle of tracking?
no, no, this can happen at any point. It can happen at any point. It can happen in pre-production. It doesn't really matter, but there's just going to be, there's a point, and I've noticed when things start to click on a record, when things just sort of start happening on their own. There's a book called The Third Mind by William Burroughs and Brian Geisen, where they talk about this concept of, it's kind of related to to ceremonial magic as well, the concept of the magical child creating this like entity due to the force of your will or your desire, or just in this case your wish to create something special, something that is artistic, you know, that is artistic power and that resonates emotionally with other people. This entity is kind of formed. The entity winds up being the recording, and it essentially takes on a life of its own. It becomes its own thing. And I feel at that point, I'm completely in service to whatever that is. And I'm just going to follow it. I'm going to do whatever it tells me to do, you know, and it's going to work itself out no matter what. And it's fun to watch that take place, even if it's a rigorous process.
And this is something that we're talking about. It's completely artistic. In your mind, it has nothing to do with whether that this will find an audience, wouldn't find an audience, what kind of commercial success it will have. This is
Doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. It's just about this thing working on its own, like being operational of its own volition, and me and hopefully everyone else on the project recognizing that and sort of being in service to it, just letting it do its own thing, you know, and using at that, like I don't go by ideas. I'm just not an ideas guy at all. I just go by intuition almost 100% of the time. Any idea that I have is influenced solely by intuition. I can't think, I mean, I can think in theoretical terms, but I find that when you try and do that too much, you're sticking a square peg in a round hole. And I wind up just sort of letting my intuition be the guide. And that comes down to things like what EQs to use, what mic pre to use, whether we should use this cable, you know, all right, let's move the mic like a 1/4 inch this way. You know, to me, these are all intuitive decisions. You know, they're all things like, did it feel right? Did it feel better the time before? That's what we're going to go with.
How much trial and error how much time you leave for trial and error with mic placement, choosing a cable? Some people think that's voodoo. You know, there's the difference between the color of this cable to that cable. How much time do you leave for that in the studio?
I don't leave any time for it at all. I just let it happen. You know what I mean? Like I don't believe in experimenting, because that kind of experiment, when people use the term experimenting, that means to me that they're basically flailing in the darkness and they don't really have an idea of what the end result is going to be. Like, I don't approach it that way. Like, to me, I already have an idea of what the end result has to be. It's like how I can manifest that in the present, in this space right now. To me, that's not experimenting. That's actually kind of driving toward a specific vision. So if I think I can improve something and I have an idea of how, or a sense, I should say, of how to do that, to me, that's not experimentation. And at that point, I'll spend as much time on it as I have to.
And if we're already in the process, do you like your artists or your bands to be super well rehearsed, under rehearsed, so there's more room for things to happen in pre-production? Like, what's your vibe on this?
Well, I mean, that really kind of depends on the style of music, you know, and I guess the overall feel of the recording that's being done. In my experience with the artists that I've worked with, being adequately or more than adequately rehearsed is ideal. like being able to come in and really knock something out. Because at that point, the artists have an understanding of instrument relationships as well as what their part should be. Like they're able to kind of, you know, I mean, you understand the concept. Looks like you know how to play a few instruments. It's not, you know, if you've played with the people that you play with, you know, but you understand feel and stuff like that, you know. And I find a lot of artists don't have a sense for what feel is, because I'm sure you've noticed that a lot of artists these days like to edit and grid records very, very tight, you know, to the point where notes are like lined up to sixteenths and stuff like that.
Well,
You
I'm a jazz musician, so all of that stuff is almost gibberish to me, because even in the most incredible electronic music that I hear, there's always going to be an ebb of flow between whatever is metronomic and whatever is breathing.
right?
And going back to Coltrane, he will play super legato with one drummer and super staccato with another drummer. I mean, you have to kind of have that ebb and flow always, or that contrast, and I think all of the albums that you made that changed my life, I don't think that, I'm assuming there wasn't a click track, and if there was one, then I'm fooled. I mean, to me, it just sounds like people breathing together, like in as one element.
Some
So
records are done with the click, but the thing is that I always emphasize with people who are playing to clicks to kind of use it as a point of reference, not something that you need to line up with precisely. It's kind of like, just understand where the beginning of the bar is, and whatever you do inside the bar is your business, kind of thing. You
I'm
know what
going
I
to
mean?
steal
Like,
this.
the
This I'm going to steal. Whatever's in the middle of the bar, that's mine.
That's exactly, yeah. I mean, like, but the thing is that like you don't even need, like, this is one thing that I've learned, you know, from doing this and from listening to a lot of music. A downbeat is not an absolute like concept. It's a relative concept. You know, think of, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, like, there's the back half of the downbeat, the front half of the downbeat. I mean, virtually, I've only seen a handful of people who can actually land on a downbeat, and sometimes, but that's not good. It's not always good. Like, where you put your note relative to the downbeat is magic. That's where all the magic happens.
Yeah.
Like being able to sense those like tiny, tiny increments of time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. Like, I mean, the more precise things are, usually the less, especially with musicians. I mean, the more super accurate they are, usually the less interested, the less emotionally engaged I am.
Exactly.
And like, you would just put on Excel on Main Street, and he's not in town with Charlie, really. I mean, kinda. Anything that Max Weinberg is on with the East Street Band. I mean, they just play the way they play. If you ask them if you could you play on top of the beat, they probably don't even know what you want from them. So I
Yeah.
think that it's and especially that chemistry between people is almost always the thing in a recording. Like, I'm assuming that on many of the albums that you worked on, there's not a lot of subs. You cannot sub this guy out, because even if he's not playing perfect, whatever chemistry that they have, that's what the thing is about. I mean,
The chemistry is very important. You know, I mean, I've done records where I've had to replace drummers, and that's always unfortunate. But
how often does something like that happens? I mean, is that and I mean, is that just almost like that's the most common urban legend within young musicians? Is it really that guy? Is really that guy, or is it, you know? You know what I mean?
well, you know, nowadays it doesn't really happen that much, or it doesn't happen as much as it used to, because people will chop up a drummer's part, and again, like you were saying before, they'll line it up, you know, and even if a drummer can't hit very well, you can replace all that with samples. So you can cover up a drummer who is poor or mediocre very easily if you've got the right, you know, if you've got the right technology and the right technicians. I mean, anyone who knows how to work Pro Tools knows how to do this. The only thing is that all of a sudden you've got a drum track that sounds like a machine played it, because essentially a machine did play it. There isn't one aspect of this performance that's original. Every hit has been moved, has been shifted over to the nearest corresponding 16th note, because all rock music basically is 16th notes, and there's very few, you know, there's very little deviation from that in most cases, you know, so you can find a 16th note where a hit's going to line up, but there's no groove, you know, which is one reason why rock music that people make now is not very listenable, because there's nothing that you can hang your hat on. There's no like swing to it. There's no shuffle, you know, there's no groove. Now, if you want to, I'm assuming that you've heard this, but if you have you listened to the drum track from Whole Lotta Love soloed?
Yeah. Of
You've
course.
heard that. I mean,
but we're talking about a different time in history where all those guys, they listen to Elvin Jones. They listen to a lot of R&B, a lot of blues. The
it's all
shuffle.
R&B.
I mean,
It's all
Mike
R&B.
Swanberg is almost like a Blakey shuffle. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, but the
Watts.
thing is that listening to Charlie Watts, listening to people play like that is one of the things that makes rock music, or you know, virtually any kind of music, so exciting. I mean, look, I love electronic music. You know, I mean, I like I like a lot of stuff that's sequenced.
Some people say you invented electronic music, but that's a different story.
No. No, I think it's wonderful. You know, I also listen to a lot of Kraftwerk records, and most of all those older records aren't sequenced. I mean, they're a bunch of guys playing together, you know, which is really kind of cool. The concept of doing electronic music where people are playing percussive instruments and doing sequences, but performing them, which gives them a certain quality that a lot of other records like that don't have. Well, there aren't any other records like that. They establish their own niche, you know.
Yeah.
But the thing is that when you're talking about music that's performed or meant to be, where you have the understanding that it's being performed by musicians, there's something that's very hard to reconcile about everything landing on the downbeat absolutely precisely, with no dynamics, with no feel, with no deviation or ebb and flow, as you referred to before, between the instruments. No you know, sway, no side to side type stuff. And that hurts. That hurts the presentation, you know. And musicians now they're not thinking about that so much. And it's not because it has nothing to do with not going back to old records, which at this point it's like, we shouldn't even be listening to those records anymore, because they're like, you know, we're talking about music that's 40, 50, 60 years old. It's like, I'm so tired of this. It's like, I'd like to hear someone make a record now that had that same kind of vitality, but was relative to the times, you know. But people are so influenced by what the business tells them that they have to do, and the fact that they don't have the resources to work with. I realize that we've gone off topic quite a bit here, but like, you know,
there's no topic. This is a free for all. You know, me digging into your wonderful brain and trying to steal as much as I can from afterwards.
Wonderful brain.
No, there's no topic here.
Last night I was driving and I went down. I went up a one-way street the wrong way. That's how wonderful my brain.
That's another one. That's another one I'm gonna steal.
I'm proud of that. But no, seriously.
Let me ask you something you just said. You just
okay
before, because I had a question about it. This is way more interesting. Now, on many of the classic Beinhorn albums, I'm assuming there's like a budget. People have time for pre-production. People have the vocal overdubs are 2 weeks or I don't know what. And now that people don't have those budgets, there's no money from labels, or everything is like almost self-produced. People are trying to record at home. What are we losing? That's
a lot. I'm not going to lie. I mean, having that kind of freedom to work that way, it's a wonderful gift, you know. And as artists, to have the freedom, to have the resources to be able to work exactly as you want it's a wonderful thing. Now, in saying that, it's not meant to suggest that oh well, we don't have those resources anymore, so music, is going to go downhill. That's nonsense, because you know people like Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, I mean, they were getting paid like a stipend or a certain amount of money from a patron to make a piece of work, and they didn't have to worry about going into a recording studio. They understood the facility that they were working with, which is they were composing music on a piano, using their brain to kind of, to figure out stuff and how things work together. People who make records now simply have to be more thoughtful. They have to be more aware of what their resources are and how they can best deploy them, when they can best deploy them. And this is one reason why I've gone completely away from working in studios to consulting and working remotely, because I feel that I'm able to provide a service at this point which is much more valuable to musicians now who don't have the resources to be able to make records the way we used to make them. And I feel that it's better than people sitting around and moaning about, oh, the good old days, they're gone, like, all right, so they're gone. Big deal. We still got to keep making records. What are we going to do about it?
So what does that mean? Tell me more. What's the service? What are we doing about it?
Well, as I said, I work remotely. I essentially provide. I've kind of parsed out all the necessary elements of production into things that I can provide through consultation, through working with people one-on-one. Pre-production. I can actually remotely produce a record, which is a wonderful thing, because now obviously the technology exists. Everyone's connected by the internet, and there are programs now where you can listen in on a person's recording session and just hear everything. And that's where having a really nice system like the one that I have, especially with the upsampling capabilities, because I can generally hear more stuff through my system listening on the internet than people in the recording studios can listening on their.
Tell me more. What's the golden system? Give me some tips.
Okay, well, what I've got is, as I said, I'm going to upgrade. I have to upgrade my computer, but for doing remote work, you do need a computer, because the programs that I'm using, you can use Source Connect. There's another one called Audio. Oh, I can't remember now. I can't remember that one.
What's the chain? What are you listening through to make it sound so?
Well, all right. Well, the Mac goes out USB into an upsampler that's made by a company called Chord Electronics. This is all like audiophile equipment.
Yeah, I love Chord.
You do?
I'm a huge fan. Yeah.
Isn't it great?
They're amazing. I never had the kind of budgets to be able to A/B things in real life. There's a guy here, a dealer that would come to your house and bring 3 options and say, keep them for a week, and whatever you decide, we'll go with that, and I'll just take the other 2, which is unbelievable. I mean, you can really hear but Chord is amazing.
Yeah.
There's a few other brands I love. They're amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, the Chord stuff is wonderful. So their upsampler going into the Chord, into the Dave, the DAC that they make.
I also hear you mentioned this earlier, that I have an unbelievable streamer. I mean, unbelievable. People say it sounds amazing.
I have not heard their streamer. I guess I should probably check that one out. I don't know if it interfaces with my system, but I'm using Audi's LCD4s and LCD-Xs for headphones. I've got a B&W monitoring system that's not hooked up because all my amplification is back in Los Angeles right now. I also have a Sonoma M1 playback system, which is, are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. What else? Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I've been considering one other thing, but I think that's probably good for the time being. It gets the job done. I mean, you can upsample like 48K, 40 or even 96, to like 705, 24-bit, which is,
it's pretty.
Yeah,
pretty
it
high,
changed
up high
things.
there.
Yeah.
And if we're already technical, give me some Shure mics. We're on a Shure show. I'm a huge Shure guy. I mean, for me, I'm one of those guys that anytime someone tries to put two mics in front of my speaker, I will let them leave it on. But the chances of me liking the other mic afterwards, from experience, I mean, I just, for whatever, it's also what I love hearing, and it's also the way I hear my speaker. But 57 in front of a Salation, it's pretty much all I ever want. Just crank it up. I'll be right there.
I mean, I think the 57 is amazing on so many levels. I mean, it's this tiny little nondescript looking microphone. You just look at it and you go, that's that. But when you put one up on a speaker, yeah, I mean, it absolutely does the job. I would say most of, if not all of the records I've done, the 57's been part of the array. One of the things that I love about the 57 is that it has its own sound. It's very specific. I know you know this, but it also blends well with other microphones. And that's one of the most important things. Like, to me, the 57 and a good ribbon mic, my favorite combo is generally like a 57 and an old RCA BK5. They just sound amazing together. I mean, all the guitars on that Soundgarden record, Super Unknown.
You brought it up, I didn't. Who's
okay.
I remember being 13, 14, 12 also, 15, 16, anywhere would go, there'll be that opening line of the chorus guitar with Leslie in the intro. I mean, they came in with it. You guys experimented in the studio. What's just that intro? What's the story behind it?
The story behind it. You mean like how it was composed, or?
Yeah, I always wondered, because it always felt improvised. That Black Hole Sound intro.
No.
Always felt like.
No, it's not. It's not improvised. Everything about that song was pretty staged. I mean, if you listen to it harmonically, it's like, it's nothing like I've heard in any rock song. It's just, and it's such a distinctive opener too. I mean, I sat down, at one point I like figured out the chords, and actually, like, some of them, it's not actually the chord structure, it's how he voices, how he was voicing.
Yeah.
Because one of them is like a sus2 or a sus4, and it's kind of like, oh, that's not a hard chord. But then the way he spread everything, it's like, yeah, but that's crazy. Who would think of doing it like that? Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't know that that Cornell was a brilliant guitarist. I mean, brilliant.
It's all him. I mean, all the arpeggiated stuff on that song.
Yeah. So they came in as a band, and it was all already like boom. They just
say what?
So they came in as a band, and there wasn't. You said there wasn't a lot of like, where do we go with this? It was all like ready.
Well, when we went into the recording studio, yeah, but when we started the record, no. Because when we started the record, I got a cassette tape from them, and there were about 11 songs on it. And I think out of those 11, we wound up using about 4. The rest of it, I'd say by today's standards was probably pretty good, but back then it was like, that's not the record we want to make. That's really not the record we want to make. And I knew that if I brought that to their attention, they wouldn't be happy about it. No, but, and this goes back to what you were saying before about what a producer does. A producer is someone who's not afraid. A producer is someone who's going to walk into a situation like this and speak honestly from a place of ethics, from a place of not wanting to insult anyone or ruffle feathers, but also being in service to a larger, to something bigger. It's not my own personal self-interest. I'm serving the truth. And truth to me right now, do you see what I'm saying? The truth is,
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful sentence, Michael.
No,
It's a
from
beautiful,
my,
beautiful sentence.
okay, ethically, I can't let you guys go in to make the record that you're planning on making. I mean, it's not, I can't say I can't let you because it's not my business. If you say that this is the record you want to make, this is the record we're probably going to wind up making, but it would go against my own personal ethics and my code of conduct if I did not, if I didn't say to you right here, right now, that my perspective is we're not ready to make a record if that's the music that you want to put on it. You know, if that's it complete.
So you tell them. So you get a sense that few songs on the cassette or the demo or whatever is for you super personal and very special, and then you say what? Let's go right more in within that direction.
No, I'm hearing, you know, 3, 4 songs on here that are good. The rest I don't feel cut it. And I think that we need to spend time writing more music for this record, you know, and they weren't very happy about that. But they accepted it, obviously. And the next 2 months were all about writing music. And
Were you part of that process, or they went to their own little space and that's it?
they would write music on their own and send demos off to me to see how I felt about them. And I encouraged all the guys in the band to write. You know, I mean, obviously Chris was the principal writer for the band, but you know, the other guys have a very strong voice,
Yeah.
and I really encouraged them to contribute their music as well, separate from anything that Chris did. And you know, and they definitely made very, very strong contributions on the record. Chris was doing the balance of the writing, and every couple of weeks he'd send me off a new batch of songs. You know, some of which were good, but you know, most of them were kind of like, you know. Gradually, though, we started to uptick the you know, the quantity of songs,
Yeah.
and then he sent me a big batch of songs at one point, and I heard them, and there wasn't one song there that I felt really would be appropriate for the record. And I started to feel like we were veering in the wrong direction, you know. And I had to talk with him about it, you know.
What did you say? I can tell you that in my experience, not to put myself in that league, but it's Chris Cornell afterwards, after all. But um, for me to get 10 songs on an album, I need to probably write 45 and fully write them out and write the music out and rehearse them. And like, I don't always know which, sometimes you get a feel that this has a thing, but it's kind of rare. So you just kind of have to go through the entire thing, and 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 will be like, will be original and also be complete
Sure,
so this
sure.
doesn't surprise me, but I wonder, you go to him and you have a sit down, and what happens there?
Well, the thing is that I was sensing that there was a pattern happening, that there was kind of a certain amount of flailing going on, that it wasn't really, it wasn't, it was directed in a different way, and that it felt like there was kind of an agenda that he had that was fueling what he was composing. And it felt to me like whatever agenda he was on, whatever was directing him to write the music that he was writing, wasn't bringing us closer to the record that I felt we needed to make. You could really, like, to me, there was a tangible sense of what these guys needed to do. It wasn't like, it wasn't like I know what it sounds like. It's more like I'll know it when I hear it, kind of thing.
Ah,
And I wasn't hearing it yet. So I had a conversation with Chris about it. And, you know, I asked him point blank, like, what are these songs for? Like, what are they about? Like, what are you trying to say? And, you know, we talked a little bit, and it came out that he was really trying to write songs that he felt would resonate with a Soundgarden fan, which was very interesting to me because I was like, that's exactly not the reason that you would be writing music at all. I mean, let's keep in mind that they became Soundgarden fans because of you, not because you're doing something that you know, that you think they want to listen to. You were never pandering to anybody. You're just being yourself. you know, so what's yourself right now? And he was pretty removed, I think, from what that concept was, you know. So I, you know, I tried to explain to him, look, you know, these people that you feel that you're writing music for, you don't know them. You've never lived their lives. You haven't walked in their shoes, you know, and you're trying to write music that you think they're going to appreciate, but that's not the case at all. They want to hear what you do, you know, so they want to, so what do you like? Like, what do you want to say? And he got really kind of, it kind of, I think that kind of freaked him out a little bit. He was like, oh, wow. You know, I mean, because it really kind of, that whole line of questioning sort of took him outside of where he felt he needed to go. And it, you know, brought him to a different space, you know. And I was like, all right, so what music are you listening to? And he was like, the Beatles and Cream. And I was like, okay, write a song that sounds like the Beatles and Cream, you know, see how that goes. And he was like, yeah, but what if it doesn't sound like Soundgarden? And I was like, don't worry if it doesn't sound like Soundgarden. You are Soundgarden. When you and your band get together and play the songs that you write, they'll be Soundgarden. No one's going to question it. And he was like, oh, okay. So 2.5 weeks later, I get a cassette tape with 4 songs on it. The first song was Fell on Black Days. I put it on. First note I heard it, I was like, oh, this is so good. This is so good. The second song was a song.
And this is a cassette that's just him and acoustic guitar?
No. This is another thing about Chris. Chris, when Chris gave you a demo, it was finished, complete, top to bottom, all the instrumentation, everything.
And he played himself, everything?
Everything. Chris, when he joined Soundgarden, he didn't join as the singer, he joined as the drummer.
I didn't know this.
He's a really good drummer, really good drummer.
I hear the same stories about Elliott Smith. Like you would see little snippets of videos of him playing like the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto on piano and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah. Or jazz
awesome.
piano, like standard, like Sinatra standards, and singing like.
Well, you can actually find the original demo for Black Hole Sun. Because I think it's been posted to YouTube. It's easy to find.
Look it up.
Black Hole Sun wound up being the very last song on this tape that he sent. Every song on the tape was really good, you know, but obviously numbers 1 and 4 were outstanding. You know, I remember playing Black Hole Sun like 15 times in a row. I just could not stop playing it. I was like, this is unbelievable. Like,
what was it about the song in it, you know, in a demo recording that hit you so hard?
Well, again, when you listen to the demo, you're going to hear the finished song. I mean, all the parts are there, all the arpeggiated bits. You know, he had the Leslie that we used on the recording. You know, all the background vocals are there. Everything's there, you know. It wasn't like you really had to add a whole lot of stuff. I made like one little tweak in the song and that was it, because he presented me with a complete idea. But when I heard it, like, it's a piece of music that it's consistently there. It doesn't ever let up. It's just, as a record producer, when people send me music, I am always in a critical listening kind of state of mind. So when I'm listening to a piece of music, I'm prepared to be disappointed. Somewhere along the line, in the 3.5, 4 minutes of this song, you're going to let me down, and I know it. I'm just waiting for that letdown. So it's like being on a roller coaster ride, but knowing when the drop's going to happen. I'm just waiting for like that feeling in the pit of my stomach where it just goes like boom, and I'm like, oh, right there. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting as I was listening to this song, and it never came, because I listened to it, and from the intro, it's like, this intro is amazing, but there's no way that he's going to be able to sustain that through the verse. And then he hits the verse, and it's like, oh my God, this is gorgeous. It's beautiful. And then he gets to the end of the verse, and he ends up, it's just like, there's no resolve. That's another thing about this song that I have heard very few people, almost no one pulls this off. There's no resolves. I mean, there's very few that, like, it's just constant tension, 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 building, building. And then at the point where you think you're going to hit that kind of resolution, it doesn't give it to you. You know, but you're still hanging on.
It happens once at the end of the guitar solo. Then he goes through that.
Yeah, he terminates it. You know, yeah. But there's so much stuff that indicates that there's going to be a resolution, and that keeps you hanging on. Now, these are like, he knew nothing about this kind of stuff, about composition or anything. Just totally feel.
That guy was all intuition?
All intuition. He
did a lot of changes, a lot of chord changes.
Well, not to mention the fact that he's using, you know, a canon, but in my eyes, do-do-do, it didn't dispose, do-do-do. You know, the call and answer canonic type, you know, movement. It's like, you don't do that in a rock song. Like, no, very few people have done things like this, but there he is doing it. And he's leaving all these like spaces where where you feel like he's taking you to like the edge, where he's setting you up for a resolve, and all of a sudden you don't get it, but you get dragged into the next section anyway. So I'm at the end of the verse at this point going like, okay, he's going to destroy that chorus. It's just going to come in, and it's going to be a letdown. And then black holes, and the band kicks in, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ, that's perfect. That's exactly what was supposed to happen there. Like, how did he know? How did he know to do that? Like this, you know, it's funny because I've had these same conversations with other musicians, and they can go so many different ways. Like when you're trying to kind of help lead someone. That's another thing that I think can also indicate that as a producer, you can have what you feel is a good sense and a good intuition about what needs to happen. But if the person you're talking to at the other end of the conversation isn't capable of being able not only to hear what you're saying, but to have it resonate with them and be able to kind of like, I guess, transmute that into a musical idea, you know, then it doesn't really matter what you've said.
And you need the part,
This was an instance where like the hat trick took place. The words hit home, they resonated with him, and he turned it into something that was like brilliant beyond belief. You know, now I can certainly take some degree of credit for it. God knows if someone else had produced the record, that would never have happened. But the fact of the matter is, again, that this is a case where I just became a vessel. I did what I had to do. I did my job, and he did his job. You know, he did his job.
But you also describe the depth in getting there, which I think a lot of artists are afraid of. There's going to be like there's going to be a lot of, you know, unknown, and that has to be okay, so you can come out of something.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Like, my feeling is this: if you decided that you were going to do this instead of being a bagger at like Ralph's, you know, or work in a bank or something like this, then you got to be prepared.
I did consider the bank, jazz. But you know, I was in the bank for, you know, I'm doing jazz for the money until the bank dream comes true. But,
There you go. But look, man, you're in a room with instruments. I see pianos and guitars, so you must be doing something right. You're able to clothe yourself, and it looks like you can feed yourself too and pay for glasses and stuff. So I think you're probably doing okay.
Listen, right? I'm the luckiest guy on earth because there's so many rules you can break in music without getting arrested.
Yeah.
I mean, you can bend time and space. It's that big.
Yeah, that's right.
That is still mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
That I can do this. I can create a universe and destroy it, or have it morph somewhere, or and that's just like, and everybody's like, yeah, that's normal. I mean, that is still mind blowing to me. But I mean, the higher, the highest priest of this is really the moment where there's going to be a process, and then it's going to give birth to a great song, and then you just feel like you just won the lottery, and you don't know when it's going to happen again, and you're just humbled and thankful to, you know, be able to be a part of it.
Yep.
But let's
Yeah.
go back as I rumble. Let's go back to how many takes to get to what we hear on an album? Because it sounds like the perfect take, the vibe.
It was. You know, I mean, we cut all the instruments separately on that one.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, honestly, I have never had much success cutting instruments live. It just never seems to work.
Huh? Wow, I'm a completely different kind of guy. Like there's just no way for me I even like, if we can, I would prefer to be in the same room with some separation. I don't mind letting it bleed. If I miss a note, it's at the end of the world, but
yeah, I can't see. The thing is that I record in a very specific way. You know,
so who goes first? There's a song.
Drums go first.
But is he not plowing in the darkness? I mean, he's not just like rowing in in a completely dark river?
No, he knows the song. He knows the song. He can play it backwards and forwards at that point, you know. I mean, he's Matt Cameron, for goodness sake. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
He's that guy. You know, he's the guy who's gonna sit out there by himself, who's gonna play his butt off, and when he's done, he's gonna get up and he's gonna be like, "Yeah, I know. You don't have to say it." Well, because he is. Because you hear him play, and you're sitting there going like, "Oh my God, that's incredible," and you're just listening to drums.
I always sensed a lot of humility in his playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always did. He always seems to me like if you, if you take the Pearl Jam guy or the Foo Fighters guy, it's just gonna be a different. I sense a lot of humility and a lot of serving of the song, or even just John Bonham. I always sense in Matt Cameron a lot of humility and just a lot of everything seems song oriented to me.
Yeah, I mean they're all going to be positive attributes no matter how you cut it. Matt is a leader. Matt is a type A drummer, and as far as I'm concerned, if you have a drummer, they should probably be a type A.
What's a type A drummer?
Type A personality, like alpha.
Okay.
Yeah, like a leader. Someone who kind of like someone who runs things. The drummer who like yells at the guitarist and says you're dragging, or yells at the singer and goes like you came in the wrong spot. Someone who's really kind of bossy and has the right amount of arrogance, because they know that they can walk into any situation and command. To me, like the drummer is the guy who should be like the loudest guy in the band, who's basically kind of barking orders at everybody else. I like that kind of drummer because generally, I'd say 95% of the time, that guy's going to sit down and start playing and you're going to go, oh my God. Even when I work with Jack Irons with the Chili Peppers, who was actually one of the most humble drummers I've ever worked with. When he was in the studio, I mean, he was this very sweet, kind of like good-natured, mild-mannered guy. But when he came into the studio, it was a different story. Like he just sort of ruled. I mean, he didn't yell at anybody, but he would sit there and you just got this sense like, you don't want to mess around with this guy. Like he was there, he meant business, and he'd sit down and play the song however many times he had to. And he just had this like thing about him where, it was actually kind of scary. He'd go off into a completely different world when he played. Like his eyes were completely shut. And one of the funniest things about him was that when he would play, he'd be playing like this, his snare, he'd bring the snare down, bring it back up, and he'd do a little twist with his stick. And it was funny because he always played rim shots. So as he played, he'd twirl his stick and the stick would land in a different spot, on the stick. And it would gradually create this divot, like this perfect divot in the stick. And at some point, the stick would just go.
That doesn't happen in jazz, but I always get a sense that Joey Kramer is also like that. That when he comes to play, it's all business. This is what he's proud of. This is all for, he has this old school,
he's a tough
sell your soul for rock and roll kind of vibe.
he's a tough little guy. Like I wouldn't want to mess with Joey. He's like, yeah, he's hard. He's pretty hardcore. That guy. He's great.
So I'm coming to the, the last couple of questions because I'm stealing way too much of your time. But two or three more questions. There's some fans questions that were left in comments either on Facebook or Instagram, on my page and Shure page. The one that more than one people asked were when Soundgarden album became the soundtrack of Universal Truth for a minute. Is this something that you foresaw in the studio? Like, is this something you can see in the studio, or were you surprised by the way the world kind of embraced it?
I was elated. I wasn't 100% surprised though, because this was a really interesting time when people made records back then. You kind of had a sense about who was going to have like the next big record. It was funny. Like you could sort of like, it was almost like making bets at the racetrack or something like that. It was like, those guys are that one's gonna hit the ticket right there. And at that point in time, everyone was going, then Soundgarden's next record is going to be huge because they're just poised. They'd been out on tour with Guns N' Roses. Everyone knew who they were at that point. Bad Motorfinger had sold like over 1 million records. So like people, they'd gotten around, and they were in a position, if they made the right record, they were in a position to do something incredible. So when I got involved in the project, I realized that was my burden to bear. That was my responsibility to ensure that the guys got over that line. So I had to make certain, at least that was what I felt the role was vested in me, to kind of take them to that point where they actually were able to get past it. So when the record hit, I was like, I mean, the minute I heard Black Hole Sun, I was like, there's no way that this record isn't going to that it isn't going to have this kind of effect. I mean, there were already a couple of songs on it at that point. Spoon Man was one of the first songs for the record. People loved it. I wasn't really that big of a fan, although now I listen to it, I'm like, nah, it's pretty good. But like, it just needed, it had all the elements that it needed. So it was kind of, it was a thing where like, as it became more and more successful, I was obviously more and more happy, and it gave me more and more pleasure. But as far as being surprised, I wasn't really that surprised, no.
So 2 last questions, also fan questions. One is, any hobbies or things in your life that you feel bring a lot to your music making?
Everything, really. Everything that happens in life, life imitates art and vice versa. Like it just, to me, it's all an holistic kind of integral type thing. My attitudes toward things, they just all, my interactions with my family, with my children, like they all fuel what it is that I do, because what we do in art is an extension of ourselves. It's a place, and it winds up being a place where we commune with whatever. It's as close as I think a person who's non-spiritual can get to spirituality.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Last question, Michael. Artists that you never got to work with, whether it's from a different time in history, or just circumstances that you always felt there's going to be there's going to be something there for you, for your taste, for your heart, for your ears.
I mean, it's funny because it's so hard to answer that. Like, on the one hand, I was never a particularly big fan of any of the artists that I worked with before I worked with them.
Wow.
And it's, well, the thing that's funny about that is that I don't really like working with artists that I'm fond of. I understand saying that.
Explain. Please elaborate.
Okay, yeah. I mean, to me, the best thing that I can offer an artist is my objectivity. That's the very best thing that I can offer an artist. And I find that it's harder to be objective with an artist if I have a certain affection for their work or a certain affinity for it, or even like a, you know, a good knowledge. The best records I think I've worked on are records when an artist has come to me where I'm familiar with the name of the artist, but I have no idea of what their work is. And that's been the case with, you know, that was the case with Manson. I mean, I really wasn't that familiar with Hole and Courtney's work when I started working with them. Same with Soundgarden. I think I'd only heard one other record of theirs before. You know, my tastes, I have veered they veered so far away from the type of genre of music that I've become identified with. And I prefer that, you know. So on the one hand, you know, I could say, you know, this one, that one, but I wound up being like more of a fan, and from that perspective, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have wanted to work with them, and B, I don't think that I would have been able to serve them very well. You know, I mean, I could say like I'd love to make a record with Led Zeppelin, you know, if John Bonham were still alive, but it's like, no, I wouldn't really, because I love their music so much and I just know it inside and out. So what good am I going to do? Like, I don't bring in that equation, I don't bring anything to the party. Does that make sense?
Well, it's a beautiful sentiment, and it's a very noble one. I will say that.
Okay, well, that's fair enough.
Michael, this has been such a beautiful lesson for me. I cannot thank you enough for. I mean, this is really every little thing I'm going to carry with me. I'm actually going to watch this afterwards. So thank you so much for coming.
Wow, that's really sweet of you, man. I appreciate it.
Stay safe and stay well and stay cool and keep on this unbelievable music. And I hope to see you further in the road in a
Thanks,
more
man.
normal world.
Absolutely. Real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
See you soon, Michael. Bye bye.
All right, man. Thank
Have
you.
a great night.